I leave the question with you, my friends. Does Japan want to lead, or does Japan want to be left behind?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I make a few opening remarks, there's something that I would like to say, and that is about the typhoons number 15 and 19 and the damage that followed after the rainstorm. I would like to extend my heartfelt condolences to those of you who were affected. I had a chance to visit Fukushima the other day. In Ueyama city, I was told that there was much damage done because of the inundation of Abukuma River. Every time I see the extent of damage on TV, my heart breaks. I'm hoping for the earliest recovery and reconstruction. Once again, good afternoon, and thank you for coming to JCAS 2019, Japan Climate Action Summit 2019. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you, Minister Koizumi, and other distinguished guests for coming to participate. And those of you young participants who will be on the youth session, welcome. Thank you for coming. In the video clip that you saw earlier, JCI is growing day by day. On the 6th of July, when we got started, we had 105 members. As of right now, the number has grown to 420. What a pleasant news. So 105 to 420, more than 4 times in just a span of 1 year. And as you can see from the video clip, we're engaged in many activities. We're off to a wonderful start in year 1, and that is because of your kind support. Climate Action Week, New York City 2019 was held in September, New York. I would like to say a few things about that. JCI engaged in a variety of activities during the week. Minister Koizumi attended a reception. We made corporate visits. And I think it was fortunate for us to have the opportunity to communicate what JCI is doing to the rest of the world. And on the 22nd of September, with the presence of Secretary General Guterres, we talked about PRB, which was launched. We all have to be based on SDGs, and the Paris Agreement. 4 institutions from Japan are designated as members, and I hope this will be a watershed change for Japanese constituents to change. So, as I said, the presence of JCI was highlighted, communicated, and increased in those events for the past year. And what I strongly feel is that we're so blessed to have JCI here in Japan. That is my feeling. Now, needless to say, in the world, the response to climate change is called for even more strongly because of the report that's been issued by IPCC centering around Europe. The world is migrating toward a net zero era. In the global warming history, I think 2019 has become the most important turning point. I think in the morning today, you must have been surprised by the news that Chile gave up on hosting COP25 because of the political confusion. That is very unfortunate, But despite that, we will continue to make progress on the climate change front because we cannot afford to wait. And we are in this new international competitive era. I think Japan needs to regain the leadership that it had back then when Kyoto Protocol was signed. We have to become a country that does not lose out in the business competition, which is becoming ever more intense. And expectations for JCI are rising. And the role to be played by JCI is also growing. It has large responsibilities. We will work on behalf of all of you to continue to fight. And I hope that JCAS 2019 will be a major step forward for us to do so. Now, before I leave the podium, there's an important role that is to introduce the next speaker.
Mr. Nigel Topping, my friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Take, and hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here in Tokyo, in Japan, and it's an honor to address you. I'd like to start by thanking JCI for their leadership. Congratulations on getting to 420 companies. That's an impressive growth, and thank you for hosting. When I was a young man, I played rugby. Some of you will be familiar with rugby. Many of you will be familiar with it now because Japan has done such a wonderful job of hosting the Rugby World Cup. I'd like to congratulate Japan for doing such a great job. I'm really looking forward to go to see England play South Africa on Saturday. I hope that England will win. And I think that the fact that Japan gave South Africa such a hard game should make it a little bit easier for England. So thank you for that as well. I played rugby for 20 years. And if there's one lesson I learned, it's that if you're not 100% committed, you will lose and you will get hurt. If you're not 100% committed, you will lose and you will get hurt. And this is a lesson for life that extends far beyond rugby. I started my career in industry in 1988. I'm delighted we have some representatives of the next generation with us here who weren't even born then, so this might sound like ancient history. But I went into industry in the UK in 1988, and the first thing I had to do was learn lots of Japanese words. I had to learn about Kanban and Kaizen and Muda and Genba Kanri. Why was I learning all these Japanese words? Well, it was because Japan had committed 100% to industrial transformation in the 70s, and Japan was winning. And in the West, we saw that we were losing. And so one of my first jobs as a young engineer was to learn about Japanese manufacturing, what is now called lean manufacturing. This is such an important innovation in the way we think about how we design and manufacture products that two academics, Womack and Jones, wrote a book about it called The Machine That Changed the World. And that machine really is the Toyota production system, Japanese lean manufacturing. So you invented here with your great engineers the machine that changed the world. This was in response to the great oil crises of the 1970s, where with war in the Middle East and the cartel of OPEC coming together, oil prices leapt by 4 or 5 times. And there was a need to respond with intelligent new ways of not just mass manufacturing, pilot high and sell it cheap, but bespoke manufacturing, mixed mode manufacturing, very high quality with very little working capital. That was all innovated here in Japan. So you took a necessity, committed 100%, turned it into innovation, and that gave you a competitive edge to win in the world markets. That's why still today, if you go to North America, nearly half of the cars are manufactured by Japanese car companies, whereas in the 70s it was almost zero. So I spent 20 years in industry, and now I have the honor of working with We Mean Business around the world. And We Mean Business it's a play on words in English, so I just want to explain the two meanings that we bring together. First thing that We Mean Business means in English is, it means we are serious, we are committed. So on Saturday, I can promise you that the England team will mean business when they face South Africa. But the second thing that it means is that we are business. We Mean Business is a coalition working with thousands of businesses around the world who are all committed to acting to resolve climate change, to deliver the solutions as fast as possible to climate change. So each one of those businesses says, we mean business on climate change. We're serious about it, and we know that business has to deliver the solutions, working with policymakers to create the positive feedback loops of ambition that will get us there. So I wanted to share a few observations of what I see around the world as I do this work with major businesses and with governments around the world. And I really wanted to point to 4 trends from the last 12 months, really. 4 things that have really changed a lot in just the last 12 months. And they're to do with science, votes, lives, and technology. Science, votes, lives, and technology. So the science, many of you here will be aware that every time the scientific community examine climate change, their understanding of the risk goes higher. And the recent 1.5 degree report just 12 months ago paints a very stark picture of the costs in human lives and suffering and economically of 2 degrees of average warming versus 1.5 degrees. And it really tells us that we have to fight to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. Every 0.1 of a degree is more human suffering and more economic losses. So that's the science. What about the votes? Well, I know there's some politicians in the room, and I can tell you in Europe, when I speak to politicians, they are all paying a lot of attention to the grassroots movements, to the Fridays for the Future, to the youth getting organized and taken to the streets. Millions of young people, fed up, frustrated, angry, frightened, sending a message to those in power, in the business community, in the NGO community, in the city governance and politicians, that our actions collectively over the last 30 years, over the last 27 years since the Kyoto Protocol, that's our generation, have been wholly inadequate and the emissions keep rising. All of those young people, if they're not already of voting age, will be voting soon. And politicians who aren't waking up to that will not be 100% committed to this issue and will lose at the ballot box. That's the science and the votes. Then there's the lives. You know, even a couple of years ago, it was easy to think of climate change as something that is going to happen somewhere else, sometime in the future. But now we know it's an issue today, and it's an issue here. It doesn't matter how rich we are in California or Japan. People are losing their lives, they're losing their homes because of wildfires and typhoons, because we haven't taken enough action on climate change. So it's not a future issue for someone else, it's a current issue for us and our fellow human beings and our fellow other living beings. And I would like to add my condolences to the people of Japan for the losses that you've suffered in the recent typhoons. But as well as mourning those losses, let's reflect on our own shared responsibility for those losses and think about what our responsibility is to act to prevent more and more and more of those tragedies. And the fourth trend is technology. You know, we see this continual surprising, I don't know why we're always surprised at how brilliant humans are at innovating. Every year we see the cost of renewables coming down. We see new innovations like floating wind so that we can harvest wind from deep sea. We see a lot of that going on in the north of Scotland with Equinor, an oil company now trying to shift to investing some of that capital into future technology where they have the skills of deep sea engineering and large project management. We see the cost of batteries coming down 17% a year for the last 10 years, and it's still going on. So that electric vehicles will be cost competitive at the purchase point with internal combustion engines within 3 to 5 years. Why would anyone buy an internal combustion engine once it's cheaper, cleaner, cheaper to maintain than an internal combustion engine? And now we understand that there is a pathway to zero, not just in renewable energy and electric cars, but in all of the heavy emitting industries. The Energy Transitions Commission, on which I sit, it's a group of CEOs, mainly of energy and materials companies, published a report a year ago called Mission Possible, which shows that for trucking, marine, aviation, steel, cement, and chemicals, we already know how to get to zero by 2050. And that knowledge is encouraging more and more companies to commit and more governments to legislate. All of those trends put together mean that 1.5 degrees or net zero by 2050 at the latest, or I like to say net zero in the 2040s, is becoming the new norm. You know, investors are expecting it. In New York, a month ago, we saw the launch of the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. Asset owners committing to their portfolio, only holding companies that are on track to net zero. And we expect that to grow very fast next year. We see whole economies committing to net zero. California, a very big economy, I think it'd be the 5th or 6th biggest economy in the world if it was a country, committed to net zero by 2045. Some of the biggest companies in the world, like Amazon, Jeff Bezos a month ago, committing to net zero by 2040. Not just the warehouses, but the whole value chain. So if you're selling to Amazon, you better be looking at eliminating your carbon footprint in the next 20 years. And at We Mean Business, we work with thousands of companies around the world, and already hundreds of them are committing to science-based targets, nearly 700. Many of them companies in Japan, 83 companies in Japan, so it's great to see that corporate leadership from Japanese companies. And increasingly, those are companies in heavy industries, which even 1 year ago people referred to as hard to abate, like too difficult to deal with. I'll give you some examples. So I mentioned Amazon, okay, a major retailer, but in addition, Daimler, the manufacturer of Mercedes cars, the inventor of the internal combustion engine, committed to net zero 2039 for Mercedes cars, and just last week they committed to net zero for all their trucks and buses in North America, Europe, and Japan. So Mercedes and Daimler trucks and buses in Japan will be net zero by 2039. That means not just a zero emissions vehicle, so batteries or fuel cells, but zero emissions steel, zero emissions plastic, zero emissions everything going into that product. So we already see that triggering raising ambition in the steel sector with ArcelorMittal and ThyssenKrupp, two of the world's largest steel companies, also committing to net zero by 2050, recognizing that they will have to be competitive. We see even big cement companies like Heidelberg Cement committing to net zero. And you must remember that for steel and cement, it's not just the energy that they use, it's the very process of turning iron ore into steel or of turning rock into cement. Those very processes emit CO2. So those companies are 100% committing to completely transforming every piece of capital equipment in the next 20 or 30 years. And one of my favorite examples is Walmart, one of the biggest companies in the world who've set themselves and their suppliers the challenge of reducing emissions by 1 gigaton. That's one company reducing by 1 gigaton through their suppliers. And they have a supplier gathering every year, and this year they invited 100 suppliers to a special extra session on climate change and emissions reductions. And they trained them on the science of climate change, on how to buy renewable electricity, how to reduce emissions in other ways. And at the end of the presentation, the head of sustainability at Walmart, who used to be a buyer, because all of the managers in Walmart used to be buyers, because that's what retailers do, they buy and sell. The head of sustainability stood up and said to all the suppliers, she said, maybe you're asking yourselves why we invited you 100 suppliers. And she said, it's because you're big, so they all knew that. And it's because you have been absent from this conversation. You have not been taking climate change seriously. This is the competitive threat that customers are starting to signal to their suppliers, that if you are not helping us reduce our collective emissions, you will not be a supplier in the future. And that applies in supply chains all around the world. You think in Japan we also have companies like Apple and Google, not Japanese-based companies, but with big presences here, committed along with many Japanese companies to 100% renewable energy, for example. So in Europe, we're seeing now this positive feedback loop between politicians setting a target for 2050 net zero and companies setting a target and starting to innovate. So that 100% shared commitment leading to innovation. So my question here in Japan is, why is Japan so slow? Why is your government talking about net zero by 2070? At least 20 years too late. Why are you not 100% committed? Why are you choosing to lose and get hurt competitively? I think there's three types of bad thinking behind these slow plans, which instead of investing in innovation, are continuing to invest in coal. You know, even in America with a crazy climate-denying president, no one's investing in coal. They've shut 20% of their coal plants in the last year in America. No one's investing in coal. You can't get the capital to invest. It's a bad investment. You will lose your money. So why is Japan so slow? Three sorts of bad thinking. One, bad economic thinking. Show me the economist in your government or in any industries who's arguing that you should add the cost of carbon capture and storage to coal as a way of making it clean. If they made that argument in the boardroom of any business in the world, they would be dismissed for being incompetent. We know that coal is already uncompetitive in many parts of the world and will be in Japan within a few years before you add the cost of CCS. It's insane, bad economic thinking. The recent report from Carbon Tracker, looking at the risk of stranded coal assets in Japan, shows that you are risking $71 billion of stranded capital, which you as a society will have to write off. You've got $29 billion of capital that you're still planning to invest in coal that you could save and invest in something useful and long-lasting instead. So as well as bad economics, this is bad industrial strategy. Let's look at a few examples. Daimler, net zero 2039. Toyota, net zero 2050. Going to lose by 11 years. Volkswagen, now transforming 6 of their factories to being 100% electric vehicle manufacturing, including 2 in China, the biggest market in the world. It doesn't matter what your policy is in Japan, you are not a big enough market to define the technology for cars around the world. So if you're late, you will lose. Another example, ArcelorMittal, ThyssenKrupp, net zero 2050, because they know they will have to do that to be able to supply the companies like Mercedes and Volkswagen who are going to make net zero cars. To supply the steel to companies like Mujad Al Futtaim, the biggest real estate company in the Middle East, or Lend-Lease, or JLL, big investors in real estate in Europe, who are going to go to net zero, will require net zero steel. So why aren't Nippon Steel as ambitious as those other steel companies? I think it's because you're not creating the policy environment, the industrial strategy. Third example, I was born in a very small country called Scotland with a population about 5% of Japan. Some great engineers, but a population of 5%. Scotland has 56% of the world's installed capacity in floating offshore wind turbines, the next generation of that technology. As far as I'm aware, Japan has 0. Why is such a powerful country, such a land of great engineers, allowing Scotland and China and Germany to take the lead by not being 100% committed on climate change? And finally, bad morality. Every yen that you invest in coal is investing in typhoons. So a government that invests in coal is investing in the death of its citizens. How can we allow that to happen with everything that we know and with all of the engineering talent that you have? Bad economics, bad industrial strategy, bad morality. More than 20 years too late. So let's remember the lesson from rugby when we're watching England beat South Africa on Saturday. If you're not 100% committed, you will lose and you will get hurt. There's still time. If you like, the World Cup for climate change takes place next year. It's COP26 in Glasgow, when every country is required by the Paris Agreement to deliver a more ambitious plan. You have 12 months to rethink that slow, 80% committed target of net zero 2070 and commit 100%. And instead of being a loser and getting hurt economically, being the innovative leader that Japan should be, can be, and I hope will be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Nigel coming to Japan, and he's telling us that we are lagging behind. And that's what I was told when I was outside of Japan. That's what I think all the time. But during the past year, there's been a change, and I really wanted him to come to Japan to see that. And since there's the Rugby World Cup going on in Tokyo, I thought he would come. That is the reason why he's here in Japan.